अच्छा, हाँ, वो आपसे बड़े उत्सुक से मिलने के। Om. 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 Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunattu Sah Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaskar. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's Vimarsh talk by Professor Arvind Sharma on religion, Dharma, and the Indic traditions. Very grateful to Professor Sharma, who is visiting India. He lives in Canada, and he comes every summer for a few months. And these days he's here, and he's agreed to deliver this talk and some other talks later on a very important subject, which is the Indic religions and the comparison between them. What do they say, how relevant they are, etc. So today's Vimarsh talk is religion, Dharma, and the Indic religious traditions. So thank you, Professor Sharma, for accepting our invitation and being with us. Some of you already know him because he was here last year and he gave a series of talks spread over almost 3 months. And that was on the subject of Hindutva. And he was telling me that that series is now going to be published by Routledge, and it will be soon available for wider uh, audience. Professor Sharma belongs to the Indian Administrative Service, I think 61 or 62 batch. Yeah. And he was there for a few years, and then he made a switch. And now he has been teaching religion in Western universities for a number of years, and he is one of the most globally renowned persons on religion and comparative religion. He's written several books. He is the Burks Professor of Comparative Religion in the School of Religious Studies at McGill University in Montreal. He has also taught in the United States, Northeastern, Boston, Temple, Harvard, and also in Australia, Queensland, Sydney, and in India, in Nalanda. So he's an academic of great repute. So we are very honored to have Professor Sharma with us. He's also taken part in some of our activities in the past. He has published extensively in the field of Indian religions and comparative religion. He is the general editor of the Encyclopedias of Indian Religions, and his book on Manusmriti is currently awaiting publication. And he was telling me that he and his colleagues, and I think Mr. Sanjay is also here, they have composed a new Smriti. They have not been Smritis for many centuries. So they have composed a new Smriti which is relevant for today's day and age. So we look forward to reading that book, and that's a very interesting project. Professor Sharma was also instrumental in the adoption of a Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the world's religions at a global conference held in Montreal in 2016. And as I said, he has been talking about these subjects, and last year he spoke on Hindutva at the VIF. Friends, this year the theme is Indic religions. and which means Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. Now, these religions have common roots in the Indian soil and constitute the essence of Indian mindset. Millions of followers practice them every day in India and outside. They are essential part of world heritage. What are the differences between Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism? What are the similarities? What are the threads that bind them? The lectures which Professor Sharma will deliver over the course of next few months will cover and explore these ideas, and they'll cover concepts such as Dharma, Varna, Ashram in Indic religions, the philosophical and in philosophical traditions of India. How should the state engage with Indic religious traditions? I think that's a very important question which Professor Sharma will also touch in due course of time. How are Indic religious traditions relevant to contemporary world and the world which is seeing increasing strife, violence, and fragmentation? So, are these religions relevant? And if so, what is their relevance and how India can play a role? Hinduism believes in the underlying unity in diverse manifestations of God's creation. Buddhism tells us how to control our thoughts and deal with unhappiness. Jainism emphasizes non-violence and multidimensional nature of truth. Sikhism exhorts a person to rise above differences of caste and creed and appreciate the true nature of God. All this we know, but there is of course much more depth which Professor Sharma will be talking about. Do these religions emphasize tolerance, humaneness, and accommodation as we believe, or there are some other nuances to these religions? I think these are some of the questions that we will raise in today's discussion and perhaps in the roundtables that we are going to organize. I'll be very happy if you are interested in attending some of these talks and roundtables. Please let us know. The roundtables will be in a more restricted format, and there will be one public lecture that will be the last lecture that will be sometimes in August. From our side, Sodipto is organizing his whole program. So you could let us know, or if anybody else you think would be interested in this subject, we'll be very happy to invite them. So thank you very much for joining us today. And now I request Professor Arvind Sharma to take the floor. But before that, we also have a very distinguished scholar with us, Dr. Shashi Prabhaji, whom you know very well. She's a distinguished fellow with the VIF, and she is a discussant for today's talk. And she is a expert in Indian philosophy, and she has written many books, and her book, which is an introduction to Indian philosophy, which is based on her talks, which she gave at the VIF sometimes during the COVID, in fact, through these webinars. We are about to publish it. I think it's almost ready. And that's also one book which I think maybe we'll have a discussion on that. And maybe we'll send it to Professor Sharma also for his comments. So I think all these various events and seminars and publications that we have done in the last few years, they have added to our understanding of Indian civilization and culture. In fact, today only I was seeing our manuscript of another book that has come out. We had done one international conference in 2020. We got a little delayed in publishing the proceedings, but now this is ready. And that is on the theme of Vasudev Kutumbakam, which was the second in the series that we done. In fact, this is much before before Vasudev Kutumbakam became the overarching theme of G20. So there has been some cogitation about these ideas, India's civilizational ethos, etc. But I think the basic question still remains that how are these ideas useful? So far, these ideas have been studied by domain experts in their own areas, but to link it up with particularly in the VIF, we talk about international relations and the global situation, etc. How do we link up these ideas so that we can build a narrative for today's world, which is going through a whole series of multiple crises, whether it is climate change, whether it is wars, and so on. So we also look at these lectures and these cogitations from that point of view. how to improve our thinking. And I think Professor Wariko is sitting here. He is taught in the JNU International Relations for a very long time. And he will tell us that from our curriculum, these ideas were totally missing. I'm not saying the Sanskrit curriculum or philosophy curriculum, but international relations curriculum. It is ought to have been there. In history, economics, थोड़ा थोड़ा कभी पढ़ा दिया होगा. But ये चीजें तो totally missing हैं. But now I find that they're so relevant, and hence we should be discussing. I mean, it's not that we अपना झंडा इधर उधर फहराना, but there has to be a very serious discussion about this and find the relevance of this. So thank you very much, and I request Professor Sharma to take the floor.
Thank you, Sri Arvind Gupta ji, for your kind words of introduction. As I start to give my talk, I feel that lest I be accused of promoting monolingualism in a polyglot nation like ours, I will first offer a few remarks in Sanskrit, briefly, follow them up with some remarks in Hindi, again briefly, and then deliver the bulk of the presentation in English, if that is all right with you. Yeah. So in offering the remarks in Sanskrit, I'll be following the lead of Professor Govind Chand Pandey, who is no longer with us, unfortunately. So I start with Dharma Shabda Vichara. Vidhanam sadhanam chaiva lokasthiti mathapicha vastu swabhava vidyanat dute dharmo vidharanat. Dharmasya vitpatti nimittam dharana dharma ityahu iti anena siddhavachnena sfuti bhavati. Religion shabdenapi bandho sambandho vasuchyate. Dharmasya pravitti nimittam gaveshmanena devayatan chaitya church masjidadishu Vasudeva Buddha Krista Muhammad Adishu Veda Tripitaka Bible Quran Adishu Dharmacharina Janeshu cha Vyavhara Malokaheta Gaurava Bhaktadi Samvalitam Shuddha Buddhirevat Nimittam Nischetavya Anukuna Padartho Dharma Kaschopayastat Adhikamaya Iti Anugadvayam Yogadvayam Anunyapyaksham Ardha Viglayamanam Tatra Kichit Swagata Meyadhinam Manasiddhim Apre Punah Manadhinam Mensiddhim Amananti. So these were a few remarks on the nature of the discussion of Dharma in a comparative context. इसका सारांश ये था कि धर्म शब्द का प्रयोग विविध अर्थों में हुआ है. तो उससे प्रश्न ये उठता है कि धर्म का अध्ययन कैसे किया जाए, क्योंकि अगर हम विहंगम दृष्टि से देखें तो बहुत सारे धर्म है दुनिया में और उन सबका एक साथ अध्ययन करना अति कठिन है. अगर हम कीट दृष्टि से देखें, वर्म्स आई व्यू, तो विषय इतना छोटा हो जाता है कि एक तरफ अतिव्याप्ति का दोष और दूसरी तरफ अव्याप्ति का दोष आने लगता है. तो इसलिए हम देखते हैं कि हमारे इतिहास में, विशेषकर दर्शन के इतिहास में, कुछ चुने हुए दर्शनों का उल्लेख मिलता है और जिनका अध्ययन होता है. हरिभद्र का प्रसिद्ध ग्रंथ है षट दर्शन समुच्चय. तो उसने 6 दार्शनिक परंपराएं स्वीकार करी. आजकल उनका उल्लेख हम लोग करते हैं न्याय, वैशेषिक विदुषी तो यहाँ बैठी हुई हैं, न्याय, वैशेषिक, सांख्य, योग, मीमांसा और वेदांत. लेकिन उस ग्रंथ में करीब 9 दर्शनों का उल्लेख होता है और उन सबका इन्हीं 6 में समावेश हो सकता है। कैसे? न्याय वैशेषिक अक्सर एक मान के पढ़े जाते हैं। तो न्याय वैशेषिक सांख्य योग और मीमांसा वेदांत, उनको हम इस तरह से जोड़ के चलें तो 6 में से 3 हुए और बाकी 3 हो जाते हैं चारवाक, जैन और बौद्ध। तो कहने का तात्पर्य यह है कि विषय को नियमित करना पड़ता है। यही हम देखते हैं माधवाचार्य के 14वीं शताब्दी के सर्वदर्शन संग्रह में। वहां लगभग 20 दर्शनों का उल्लेख मिलता है। तो इसी प्रकार हम देखेंगे कि धर्म के अध्ययन में भी कुछ परंपराओं का विशेष रूप से अध्ययन होता है। तो ये हमारा विषय है। अब मैं अंग्रेजी में शेष जो बात कहनी है वो कहता हूँ। I would like to begin by referring to a scholar by the name of Professor Klaus Klostermaier of the University of Manitoba in Canada, who regrettably passed away recently. In his writings, he draws a distinction between two terms, one which he calls the religion of study, and another which he calls the study of religion. He uses the term, the religion of study, to draw attention to the fact that each major religion has a long history of study internal to that tradition. That is to say, for instance, Judaism has a long history of the study of its sacred text, the Torah, as illustrated by the presence of the two Talmuds, the Palestinian and the Babylonian. Christianity has a long tradition of theological reflection, which produced such famous names as Augustine. Islam similarly has a tradition of studying the Hadith, that is, the study of the words and deeds of the Prophet, a tradition which was consolidated by such famous figures as Bukhari and Muslim. Hinduism has a long tradition of the study of the Vedas, beginning with Yask, 5th to 7th to 5th century BC. Buddhism has its own tradition of the study of the scriptures, which produced such famous names as Buddha Ghosh. Jainism produced major works on Indian philosophy. I've already mentioned some of them. And works which are associated with such famous names as Haribhadra and Hemchandra. And Sikhism's fifth Guru Arjan produced the Adi Granth, while Khushwant Singh produced his magisterial, The History of the Sikhs, in our own times. Klostermaier points out that this religion of study, as he calls it, should not be confused with the modern study of religion. The modern study of religion is a relatively recent phenomenon, whose beginning is usually placed in the middle of the 19th century. Max Muller is usually regarded as a pioneer of the field, which has since come to be known in English by the term comparative religion, and in Germany by the word Religionswissenschaft. It has also been called the history of religion, or more plainly, the study of religion, or just religious studies. There is one major difference between the religion of study and the study of religion. The religion of study remains within the confessional framework of the tradition which is being studied. But the study of religion makes no such assumption. You do not have to believe in the religion you are studying to study it. Hence, such study is called the academic or the non-confessional study of religion. This branch of study regards itself as mainly devoted to the study of world religions. These world religions were first identified as Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism because it was the stated role of these religions, or rather even the goal of these religions, to spread all over the world. Soon, however, it came to be felt that the parent traditions of these religions could not be ignored or denied this honor. And therefore, Judaism came to be included in the list as a precursor of Christianity and Islam, and Hinduism as the precursor of Buddhism. While these developments were taking place in the West, it was also becoming exposed to the richness of Chinese religion and culture. And thus the Western intellectual world came in contact with two major religious traditions, which came to be called Confucianism and Taoism. Chinese Buddhism had already been recognized as a major form of Buddhism. Thus emerged the following original list of world religions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Confucianism and Taoism. These seven constitute the non-negotiable core of world religions. Thereafter, the list was extended to include other religions such as Jainism and Sikhism in India and Shinto in Japan. Primal or tribal religions have also been knocking at the door of this club for some time now, are in the process of being admitted. Now, it might be worth noting that while we are on the subject, that the term world religions is not identical with the expression religions of the world. Religions of the world as a category includes all the possible religions of the world, including, for instance, the Baha'i religion or Cow Taoism of Vietnam, and so on. While the term world religions tends to be restricted to the list of such religions as mentioned above, although the list is somewhat variable. There is a distinction to be drawn between world religions and world's religions. Now, why am I burdening you with such details when I'm supposed to be speaking on the Indic religious studies? This is because this background is necessary to explain the emergence of the term, the Indic religious tradition or traditions, in modern discourse. If one goes back to the original list of world religions, as consisting of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam on the one hand, Hinduism and Buddhism on the other, and Confucianism and Taoism as well, then one soon realizes that these traditions are geographically distributed in terms of their origin, not necessarily their spread, their origin. Thus, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam originated in the Near East, Hinduism and Buddhism in the Indian subcontinent, and Confucianism and Taoism in China, or more broadly, the Far East. This led to identifying the world religions into three families. One consisting of the three Abrahamic religions, namely Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Another as the Indic religious tradition, consisting of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. Excuse me. And a third, that of religions of the Far East, to cover Confucianism and Taoism. This, however, is only one way in which this term came into play. While these developments were taking place in the West, the other shoe was dropping in India. We noted earlier that the academic study of religion began to emerge as a discipline in the West around the middle of the 19th century. A major historical development also occurred coincidentally at around the same time on the Indian subcontinent. This is known as the Indian Mutiny of 1857, an event which Indians prefer to refer to as the First Indian War of Independence, as it was described by V.D. Savarkar, whose name we will also encounter later. This was a major attempt by the Indians, especially in North India, to put an end to British rule over India. The attempt, however, failed, and by 1859, the British had regained complete control over the subcontinent. This period of renewed British rule resulted in lasting changes in the political, social, and religious life of India. What is relevant for us here, however, is a change which was expected to occur, but did not. Professor A.L. Basham has pointed out that the conversion of India to Christianity was widely expected, especially in British circles in the post-mutiny period. What actually happened was that instead of Hinduism being replaced by Christianity, several movements began appearing within Hinduism to reform it. This was becoming apparent by the 1880s. That Hindu identity had survived the catastrophe of the mutiny. An interesting clue in this context is presented by the genealogy of the word Hindutva. For a long time, it was thought that the word was first used by V.D. Savarkar in 1923 in an influential tract titled Essentials of Hindutva. It was soon discovered that its use could be traced back even earlier to Chandranath Basu in 1892. Indore Sen Gupta, however, has pointed out recently that its appearance can be traced even earlier in the famous Bengali novel Anandamath by Bankim Chand Chatterjee, which was first published in 1882. It is the use of this word by V.D. Savarkar which is relevant to our present concern. It is, however, important to provide a brief historical background to comprehend what Savarkar was trying to achieve by using this term. Once British rule had become firmly established, or rather re-established in India, the British set about the business of administering the country in a systematic way. In order to enable them to do so, they proceeded to acquire the required information about the Indian people through a series of census operations. This process started in 1871 and was placed on a firm footing in 1881 through a series of decadal censuses. These censuses also sought to gather information about the religious identity of Indians. The religious identity of India in pre-British India had an amorphous and plural character to it. But the censuses were carried out on the assumption that one could belong to only one religion at a time. As a result of these census operations, the amorphous and fluid dimension of India's religious identity began to solidify along distinct lines. The experience of the Punjab census provides an interesting example here. Professor Hugh MacLeod points out that in the early stages of the census in the Punjab, a person could declare himself or herself to be both a Hindu and a Sikh, an option not available later. Professor Sumit Sarkar has noted that census officers from the field would write back to the superintendents that certain communities practiced religious syncretism to such an extent that they could not be classified as either Hindu or Muslim. They were then instructed to use their own discretion in the matter. By the early decades of the 20th century, it started becoming apparent to certain Hindu intellectuals that the composite religious identity of India was being fragmented into distinct religions as a result of these operations. These intellectuals, in keeping with the plural nature of the religious traditions of India, became concerned that the various elements of this composite tradition were being turned into separate religions. They were especially concerned when it came to the religions of Indian origin, which were in general more accepting of religious diversity than the religions of foreign origin present in India, such as Christianity and Islam. They could not intervene in the census operations themselves, as political power lay in the hands of the British, but they tried to retrieve the situation in other ways. It was in such a context that V.D. Savarkar came up with the concept of Hindutva. He argued that even if the composite religious traditions of Indian origin were being separated into distinct religions, as into Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism, all of them nevertheless shared the same culture, for which he used the word Hindutva. A very significant aspect of this culture consisted of regarding India as their holy land. It is clear, therefore, that the concept of an Indic religious tradition consisting of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism was also taking shape outside the Western academia in the public life of India. Thus, the evolution of the concept of an Indic religious tradition or traditions has two dimensions: a global, or more accurately, a Western dimension, which took shape through the academic study of religion, and a national dimension in the development of Hindutva. In my particular case, it also has a personal dimension, apart from a global and a national one. I delivered a series of lectures in the summer of 2023 at the Vivekananda International Foundation, that is right here, on the theme of Hindutva for our times. At the end of these lectures, the director of the foundation, Sri Arvind Gupta, proposed that I might consider delivering a set of lectures on the Indic religious traditions, as the expression had gained some prevalence in modern discourse, but had not received desired academic attention. When I sought some guidance from him regarding the orientation of these lectures, he wrote to me as follows. I quote now. I had suggested the Indic religion topic with a specific purpose. India needs to build a narrative for the world. The Prime Minister has been positioning India as a Vishwa Bandhu by highlighting Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam as a global theme. He has also said at multilateral fora and in bilateral discussion that this should not be an era of wars. Indic religion emphasizes the concept of unity and diversity. Often Buddhism is seen as a counter to Hinduism. The common elements are ignored. A comparative study of Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Jainism would be most useful. I hope you have been hearing me till now. In order to fulfill the mandate of these lectures, we will have to begin by making a series of distinctions. The first distinction we need to make is between the Indic religious tradition, as the expression is used in the academic study of religion, and as the expression is used in Indian political discourse. In our use of this term here, we now go beyond these usages. The expression as used in the academic study of religion is value-free. It is not intended to be used in any other way beyond academic discourse. However, as is clear from the mandate, we will be using the term in the context of something we value, such as religious tolerance or ecumenism. Similarly, while its use in Indian political discourse is not value-free, the value attached to the category in Indic of religious traditions in this discourse is political. The value we shall be attaching to it has an interfaith context rather than a political one. It will also be useful to distinguish between the expression Indian religious traditions and the expression Indic religious traditions, as was the case with the distinction between world religions and world's religions. While the expression Indian religious traditions will cover all religions present in India, the expression Indic religious traditions only includes religions of Indian origin, namely Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. The third preliminary distinction which needs to be recognized is between the Western word, religion, and the Indic word, Dharma. This is a very important distinction with which I assume most of us are already familiar, as much has already been written on it. Our argument now is further advanced by the recognition that sometimes the Indic religious tradition is also referred to as the Dharmic traditions or the Dharmic tradition, in contrast to the Abrahamic traditions, that is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The use of the expression Dharmic traditions sets up a contrast between these traditions and the Abrahamic religious traditions. The contribution which the Dharmic traditions can make to the promotion of religious harmony is disclosed by this contrast. The contrast may be set up as follows. The religions covered by the Abrahamic tradition operate on the principle of singular religious identity, while the religions covered by the Dharmic traditions operate on the principle of plural religious identity. This is not to say that the religions covered by the Dharmic traditions do not sometimes make exclusive or singular claims. But the point is that both doctrinally and practically, they also allow for dual or multiple identity. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that it is not possible for one to be a Jew, a Christian, and a Muslim at the same time. However, it is possible for one to be a Hindu and or Buddhist and or Jain and or Sikh at the same time. This is possible because the concept of religious identity with which these religions operate is not as exclusive as the one underlining the Abrahamic traditions. Allow me to illustrate this point with concrete examples from Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. The examples I will be presenting are drawn from the whole range of Indian history, modern, medieval, and ancient. The example from Hinduism, which I am providing now, we owe to Professor T.N.P. Mahadeva. He notes that when a Hindu pontiff in Tamil Nadu was asked by an American to convert him to Hinduism, he asked the American, "Have you tried Christianity?" There is also the encounter between Rabbi Richard Rubenstein and Swami Muktanand. Rabbi Rubenstein is a well-known theologian of Judaism of the Death of God school. As he advanced in life, he felt less and less formally committed to Judaism. This disturbed him greatly, and he shared his disquiet with his wife Betty, who shared it with an Indian colleague of hers. Her Indian colleague told her that Hindu Swamis have a way of dealing with such issues. She therefore arranged a meeting between her husband and Swami Muktanand. When Swami Muktanand came to town. At this meeting, when Rabbi Rubenstein was introduced to Swami Muktanand as part of a group, Swami Muktanand apparently ritually blessed everyone in the room except Rabbi Rubenstein. When Rabbi Rubenstein protested such treatment, Swami Muktanand remarked, "Is that so?" He then gave Rabbi Rubenstein a special blessing. And then he said to him, "I hope you don't believe in your religion. I don't believe in mine." Rabbi Rubenstein takes a full half hour to narrate this encounter, which affected him profoundly in a positive way. He added, after sharing the impact this simple utterance had on him, that the Swami later explained to him that in the early stages of our spiritual evolution, we need the protection of our tradition. Just as a plant requires a trellis around it to protect it as it grows. But once the plant becomes a tree, the trellis itself becomes an obstacle and has to be cast aside. I now turn to Buddhism and would like to share with you the account of the conversion of Jain general Siha to Buddhism. I believe Siha is a form of Singh. Yeah, but I'm open to correction on that. General Siha was a prominent patron of Jainism. When he became aware of the reputation of the Buddha as a great religious teacher and shared his desire to see him with his colleagues, they tried to dissuade him by presenting the doctrines of the Buddha in an unflattering way. He was dissuaded 3 times in this way, but finally went to see the Buddha himself and asked the Buddha whether he taught the doctrines which his colleagues said he had been teaching. The Buddha clarified his position in a way which so impressed the general that he expressed his desire to become his lay follower. Thereupon the Buddha said, "Be careful, general. You are an eminent Jain. The Jain community looks up to you. Would you continue to patronize the Jain community after becoming my lay follower?" It was only after General Siha assured him that he would continue to be a patron of the Jains that the Buddha accepted him as a lay follower. We turn for our next example to Jainism. It is provided by a story told in the Prabodh Chintamani of Merutung, 13th century, which involves the Chalukya emperor of the 12th century called Jaisingh Siddharaj. In his quest for truth, the king questioned the teachers of the various traditions and found that they were at odds with each other. When he approached the Jain savant Hemchand about this predicament, the Jain savant narrated to him the following story. Once there was a merchant's wife who sought a means for restoring the affections of her husband, who had deserted her for another woman. She obtained a spell that was guaranteed to put her husband in such a state that she could lead him about with a string. When she applied the spell, she discovered that this was a literal promise, not a figurative one, and her husband was transformed into a bull. She led him to pasture, to graze, sat beneath a tree, and wept. There she overheard Shiva telling Bhavani that in the shade of this very tree was a herb that could restore her husband to human form. The woman gathered every plant that she could find growing beneath the tree and forced the bull to eat them all, with the result that he was restored to his human form. The moral of the tale, according to Hemachandra, was that just as the man was restored by the herb, even though no one knew which particular herb did the trick, so in this Kali Yuga, a wise person should obtain salvation by supporting all religious traditions, even though no one could say with absolute certainty which tradition it was that brought about the salvation. Sikhism provides us with the example of Raja Ranjit Singh, who ruled over the Punjab in the first half of the 19th century. The flag of his army was saffron in color and carried the figures of Kartikeya, Hanuman, and the goddess Chandi. Khushwant Singh, the famous Sikh historian, laments that the greatest Sikh ruler was a Hindu. Professor Kapil Kapoor notes that when the young Ranjit Singh defeated the king of Afghanistan, he required as a condition of the peace treaty that the doors of the temple of Somnath, carried away by Mahmud of Ghazna in around 1025, should be restored, which was done. This provides as good an example as any of the interpenetration of the Dharmic tradition. It is clear, therefore, that the Dharmic religious traditions present a model of interaction among the various religions, which is quite different from the one we find in the Abrahamic family of religions. There is a danger, however, when one makes this point of presenting a rather idealized picture of the situation. In other words, we need a kind of reality check for our argument. If we look at the matter in this spirit, then it seems desirable to make 3 points in the form of caveats. The first is that when we say that the Indic religious traditions here, are more tolerant towards each other, the statement is being made not in an absolute, but in a relative sense. It is not the case that there are no examples of friction or even violence among them. For instance, there are depictions of Hindu deities being attacked by Buddhist deities in Tantric iconography. There are also instances of conflict between the Jains and the Buddhists on the one hand, and the Vaishnavas and the Shaivas on the other, from Tamil Nadu. The point rather is that these instances are relatively few when one takes into account the history of their interaction over a period of 2000 years, almost. Professor D.N. Jha, a historian, delivered the presidential address to the Indian History Congress in 2006 under the title, Looking for a Hindu Identity. In the course of this address, he did, if I may be permitted, dig up all the dirt, as it were, against Hinduism. At the end of this rather critical survey, however, he himself concludes that all the instances he has cited did not amount to much. Therefore, when we describe the relationship among the Dharmic traditions as more harmonious as compared to the Abrahamic, then the statement is being made in a relative rather than an absolute sense. The point, nevertheless, although relative, remains substantial. as will become clear in the light of the following example. There were various indigenous forms of religiosity present in the United Kingdom before Christianity arrived on the island. The triumph of Christianity in Great Britain meant that all these forms of indigenous religiosity got wiped out after the arrival of Christianity. Around the same time as this was happening, in Great Britain, Buddhism arrived in Japan. But the native form of the religiosity of Japan, as represented by Shinto, survives there to this day and is flourishing along with Buddhism. It was argued about, and this is, I think, my second caveat, that the Dharmic traditions in India is a new model to offer of interaction among religions. We need to realize, however, deflating as it might be to us as Indians, that this model is not unique to India, and that, in fact, plural religious identity was a fact of life, not just in India, but in Asia itself in pre-modern times. For instance, Chinese religious life in the medieval period was characterized by the presence of three teachings, Sanjiao, those of Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. It would be misleading for us to think that these three teachings implied that some people followed Buddhism, some followed Confucianism, and some Taoism. It was rather the case that people chose to follow the different teachings at different times, according to their inclination. It might be interesting to see how these three teachings were intellectually reconciled. Here are three examples of how this was done. One, use Buddhism to rule the mind, Taoism to rule the body, Confucianism to rule the world. Second attempt, although the three teachings are different in the arguments they put, they are one, in a sense. Third attempt, if someone is a Confucian, give him Confucius. If he's a Taoist, give him Lao Tzu. If he's a Buddhist, give him Shakyamuni. If he isn't any of them, give him their unity. In Japan, even today, more than 95% of the Japanese declare themselves to be followers of Shinto, and 76% of the same population also declare themselves as Buddhists. Should we then not describe the position we are developing as an Asian and not an Indic one? One can certainly do that, and perhaps one could even look forward to the day when would be able to do so. The problem, however, is that after the Marxist revolution in China, that country has abandoned the ironic position. This ironic position, which characterized its culture prior to the Marxist revolution. It is now left to India and Japan to carry the flag forward. To these two caveats, one must also add a third one. There are two developments in modern India in the 20th century which seem to compromise the position being developed there. It could be argued that they are the result of the new notion of religion as an exclusive identity introduced by the British during the rule over India. This attitude, however, has apparently been internalized in the two developments I now mention. The first is represented by the definition of Sikhism, or rather of a Sikh, as found in the Shiromari Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee Act of 1925, an act by which the Sikh community gained the right to run its own Gurdwaras. This act defines the Sikh as one who believes in the 10 Sikh Gurus and in the Guru Granth Sahib. So far, so good. But then it adds the following clause, and does not believe in any other religion. This last clause is a modern innovation which goes against the spirit, dare we say, of the Indic religious traditions. The second modern development, which compromises the spirit of the Indic religious traditions, is provided by the conversion of the former untouchables to Buddhism, carried out by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in 1956. The conversion is not the problem. The difficulty arises in the manner in which it was carried out. The traditional form of conversion to Buddhism required the acceptance of the three refuges, the three Sharan or the three jewel, three Ratna, namely, I seek refuge in the Buddha, I seek refuge in the Dhamma or Dharma, I seek refuge in the Sangha. When these refuges were administered to the new converts, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, however, also asked them to undertake a series of vows which rejected Hindu deities and practices. This again is a modern innovation. This becomes clear and even obvious when we compare this with the discussion between Gautam Buddha and General Sia. We may now resume our argument in a more realistic frame of mind after this caveat. As we do so, let me briefly recap what the argument has been so far. The argument basically is that the Indic or Dharmic religious traditions provide a better model for securing religious harmony and peace than the one provided by the Abrahamic religious traditions. It was indeed the failure of the Abrahamic traditions to provide a suitable model of interfaith interaction, especially Christianity, which gave rise to secularism in the West. India adopted the secular model after independence in the version Sarva Dharma Sambhav, or an attitude which treats all religions on par. If we now wish to move toward the future, which is more in line with the spirit of the Indic or Dharmic traditions, then we will need to make two new moves. The first would be to move beyond Sarva Dharma Sambhav and adopt an attitude represented by the term Sarva Dharma Sadbhav. That is to say, goodwill towards all religions. We will have to replace an attitude of religious neutrality with that of religious goodwill. Once we start to appreciate how the various religions enrich our lives, once we do so, we will be able to move towards the next stage represented by the term Sarva Dharma Mama Bhava. That is to say, all religions are mine. In other words, I am the legatee of not just my own religious tradition, but of the religious tradition of humanity as a whole. This conclusion might appear sentimental. It is, however, quite logical if one looks at it in the following way. One begins by asking the question, which of these two categories is more fundamental? Being the follower of a particular religion, say Hinduism or Christianity, or being a human being? It is possible to be a human being without being a Hindu or a Christian. But it is not possible to be a Hindu or a Christian without first being a human being. Therefore, the category of being a human being is more fundamental than that of being a Hindu or a Christian. I am close to concluding now, and this is my last sentence. This is how the Dharmic religious traditions ultimately culminate in the realization of the saying, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The whole world is one family. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sharma, for that brilliant exposition of the dharmic traditions of Indic religions. I think it was a very deep lecture, a lot of ideas here. And I request Professor Shashiprabha Kumar to offer her comments, what she heard.
ॐ भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैस्तुष्टुवांसस्तनूभिर्व्यशेमहि देवहितं यदायुः ॐ शान्तिः 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 Namah Sarvebhyah Sarvabhyascha. Respected Chair Dr. Arvind Gupta ji, distinguished speaker Professor Arvind Sharma ji, dear and distinguished participants in the audience. I am grateful to Dr. Gupta for giving me this opportunity to listen to a wonderful lecture by Professor Arvind Sharma. Those of you who have been hearing him, they will vouch with me that it's always a pleasure listening to Professor Sharma because he brings out the whole perspective of the topic he chooses in a very logical and lucid manner. I'm sure, like me, many of you might have learned a lot from what Professor Sharma said today. Basically, he drew distinction between many terms, twin terms, like religion of study, study of religion, world religions, religions of the world, Indic religious tradition and Abrahamic religious tradition, and Indic religious tradition he lastly calls the Dharmic tradition and Abrahamic religious tradition, and then global study of religion and the national study of religion. So he has drawn a distinction between these notions and tried to clarify what we mean by the Indic religious tradition. While discussing these differences between the terms, he also dwelt upon the idea of Hindutva briefly as espoused by V.D. Savarkar, and he also talked of singular religious identity, which is also a fixed religious identity, and a plural religious identity as practiced in India before the British brought a rigid religious identity. I feel that most striking feature of our own dharmic tradition has a lot to offer in this regard. But before I go to that, I think there is not much left for me to add to what has already been said by Professor Sharma, except the fact that has not been dwelt upon by him in detail, saying that it is very well known. It might be very well known, but that is the only thing left for me to deliberate upon. I mean to say that is the concept of dharma in Indic tradition, which is so deep in its intent and so diverse in its content that it is almost difficult to define it in clear terms. Dharma, as we all know, it has so many meanings. In fact, Manu himself has given so many definitions of dharma. He was not satisfied with the one he gave earlier. He goes on revising and refining his own definitions. If we go to Mahabharata, many definitions are given there. So I have collected some 30 definitions of dharma. And then there is this famous definition which has been given by Kanada, the exponent of Vaisheshika Sutra, of which I am a student. I would like to quote a few of them, beginning from the Rig Veda. We have the term dharma in Rig Veda in the Purusha Sukta. Yajjena yajyam ayajanta devaha tani dharmani prathamanyasam. Prathama dharma. We have many types of dharma in Indic tradition. We all know most of these. This is the prathama dharma. We have the varna dharma. We have the ashrama dharma. Then we have the raja dharma, pati dharma, kula dharma, patni dharma, putra dharma, samanya dharma, vishesha dharma, apad dharma, and whatnot. One can go on and on, but I'll just point out a few definitions which are very popular. The other one, which is very well known, is धर्मो हि तेषाम् अधिको विशेषः धर्मेण हीनः पशुभिः समानः. Human beings are human beings. They are unlike the animals because they have dharma. What is this dharma? Is this dharma religion? No. What I want to point out is that religion is not the equivalent and the exact translation of dharma. That creates lots of problems. So dharmo hi tesham adhiko visheshah dharmena hinaha pashubhis samana. Those who don't have dharma, they are like pashu. Dharana dharma ityahu dharmo dharayate praja. What is dharma? It is the sustaining feature. It sustains humanity. It sustains anything which observes dharma. It sustains the earth. It sustains the cosmos, and like that. We have another definition in Mahabharata which is more of the ethical tone. Shruyatam dharma sarvasvam shrutva chaiva vadharyatam dharma sarvasva. It's not just dharma. Essence of dharma is that you should not do to others what you don't like to be done to yourself. Atmanah pratikulani paresham na samachare. This is dharma sarvasva. Then goes on, and Mahabharata says acharah paramo dharma. From dharma sarvasva we go to parama dharma, ultimate dharma. What is that? Achara, conduct. So it's not the religious practices that we understand today, but it is the conduct of a human being which is the ultimate dharma. Then Manu gives these 10 features of dharma, dashakam dharma lakshanam. Again, he revises it and says, Eta chaturvidham dharma lakshanam. Then Yajnavalkya says, Ayameva paramo dharma yad yogena atma darshanam. Paramadharma, Achara Paramadharma says Mahabharata. Yajnavalkya says Paramadharma is self-realization. How come? Through yoga. We are going near the International Yoga Days approaching. So Yogena Atma Darshanam is Paramo Dharma. This is the ultimate dharma. And I come to the Vaisheshika definition of dharma. Yato bhyudaya nishreyasa siddhi sa dharma. This is very comprehensive, very secular, and very logical definition, very acceptable also. Abhyudaya nishreyasa siddhi. Dharma is that which leads you to material progress as well as spiritual perfection or accomplishment, fulfillment. So, not only material prosperity, but also spiritual fulfillment. These two, if you attain these two by observing some traits, some ethical practices, then it is dharma. So this is a very, very wide and broad definition of dharma, which is very often quoted without knowing that this is the Sutra of Vaisheshika. And then I go to last definition I would like. This is not actually a definition, but it is a usage in the Prithvi Sukta of Atharva Veda, which talks of plurality of religions. Nana dharmanam janam vibhrati janam bahudha vivachasam. Prithvi, this earth, this sustains and holds people who follow different dharmas. Now we have to go and search for ourselves what is this dharma. But there was this nana dharma. Multiplicity of religions is suggested. What is this dharma? That is for us to explore and expound. coming back to what Professor Sharma said today, these are the definitions which I just shared with you. So I think the most striking feature of our dharmic tradition, this Indic dharmic tradition, is its impersonal and therefore universal nature. What comes out from all these definitions is that the Indic tradition is very impersonal. We call it apaurusheya. So Indic tradition right from the Vedas is apaurusheya. It's not related or restricted to one section of humanity or one class of humanity or one gender. It is very, very comprehensive and inclusive. We have different and striking contrasts of terms which have been used, and we all use them without reading the Vedas, without knowing Indic religious tradition, without following anything. But we, the Indians, the Indian psyche, Indian mind, embeds them all in itself. Like singularity and plurality are in the same set of expressions, ekam sat and bahudha vadanti. This is a Vedic statement, of course. Ekam sat vipra bahudha vadanti. On the one hand, it is one. On the other, it is bahudha. So one is expressed as many. So singularity and plurality are intertwined. They cannot be separated in the exclusive manner as it is being done in modern interpretations of religion, of society, of relation, and of many other things. Ekam va idam vibabhuva sarvam. Ekam sarvam. So whenever you talk of one, there is one reality according to Vedantic philosophy, Vedic philosophy, but that reality is manifests itself into plurality. Ekam va idam vibabhuva sarvam. Whenever we pray for our own peace, but we say sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayah. So ekam sarvam. Vishwam, Shrunavantu Vishwe Amritasya Putraha. Vishwe, all the beings of the world, they are equal. How come? Because they are offsprings of the immortal divine. Then comes, if I bring in the philosophy here to explain these terms, the contrasting terms, Professor Sharma, we have this Samanya and Vishesha, generic attributes and the specific attributes. In fact, in the Vaisheshika itself, we have Samanya Dharma and Vishesha Dharma. Samanya Dharma or generic duties, because Dharma denotes a duty, a law, morality, justice, and many more connotations are there for the term dharma. So we have the generic as well as the specific connotations of dharma, and we use these terms in very, very floating manner like vayam, ayam. Vayam, we, and ayam, this. So vayam syama patayo rainam, we pray on the one hand. Ayam lokah priyatamaha. This world is beautiful. It's very beautiful. And then we have the term to denote these ayam and vayam. We have philosophical, technical terms of jati and upadhi. Now I am coming to the conclusion of Professor Sharma. He concluded by posing questions. Is it better to follow a particular religion, or it is better to be a good human being, isn't it? So is it better to be a good Hindu, a good Muslim, a good Sikh, a good Jain, or to be a good human being? According to Indian philosophy, this is jati and upadhi. Jati is the generic term. It is the natural common character. Upadhi is an imposition. So we all are born as Shrunavantu Vishwe Amritasya Putraha. We all are born as progeny of the divine. No disparity, no distinction. All of us are progeny of the same source, which is immortal and which is divine. So jati is that which is natural, which is innate, which cannot be changed. While upadhi can be changed. A Hindu can convert, isn't it? And so can any other religious person. Following one religion, one can change his religion, one can change his nationality, one can change anything he or she likes. These days, even gender can be changed. But even though he is a man or she's a woman, manushyatva or humanity, humanness, that will never be changed. As long as one is alive, that manushyatva, which is a jati. So in our system of philosophy, samana prasavatmika jati. What is a jati? Jati is that, not that which we are following today. The problem today is that we have created many segmentations, many exclusions, and many boundaries. And not only we have created those boundaries, we are getting those boundaries as rigid, as solid, and as fixed as they can be. That creates problems. So jati and upadhi, the distinction between these two is that unity is given to us. It is taught to us also that there is one consciousness in everything. But plurality and diversity, it is embedded in our mind and heart. We cannot negate it. Every day we deal with diversity, we encounter plurality, so oneness and manyness, singularity and plurality. What better example of this than the Upanishadic statement where the divine himself, the Prajapati says, Eko ham bahusyam. I am one, but I want to be many. So even the divine wants to be manifest oneself into many. So this fusion or merger of one and many, this is an interplay which is there in Indian thought, Indian psyche, Indian philosophy, where religion and philosophy. Now I'm coming to my last point, that in India I have been a student of philosophy. I have never taught religion for that matter. So I am bringing you all to philosophy. In India, religion was closely intertwined with philosophy. Religious practices were never without a philosophical background or overtone. And as long as this practice was there, there were religious frictions, there were conflicts, as Professor Sharma mentioned, but ultimately, the philosophy or the thought behind these religions, the singularity of the thread that was there in all these pearls or beads, Mai Sutram Idam Protam Sarve Manigana Eva. There are different beads and different pearls, but a thread is there. And that thread is the thread of Indianness. And that is what the Indic religious tradition signifies. So, religious conversion is possible, but that is not an idea of Indic religious tradition. What is the ideal of Indic religious tradition? That is the ennobling of all the human beings, not one or two, not only those who belong to us, but everybody. Kranavanto Vishwam Aryam. Vishwam, the whole humanity should be ennobled, elevated in such a manner that we not only practice these religious austerities, the acharas, but also the underlying ideas which justify and explain the karma kanda that we are doing. We are watering the plant of tulsi. It's a religious ritual, but it had a scientific idea behind it which has not been explained. So my request to you and other teachers of religion will be that this is the beginning point for us to start using the term dharma in place of religion. Until and unless we start using, as you have yourself started saying, dharmic tradition, because no better way of contrasting the Indic tradition from the Abrahamic tradition, we have to bring in the dharmic tradition. Dharma is so wide and so broad that it cannot be explained by the term religion. So that is one thing. Second, I would like to differ a bit from you, Professor Sharma, when you say Sarva Dharma Samabhav, fine. Sarva Dharma Sadbhav, okay. But Sarva Dharma Mama Bhav, no. Because Mama Bhav is not acceptable and it's not possible also. Sarva Dharma Mama Bhav. Rather, I would plead for Sarva Dharma Sahabhav. Sarva Dharma Samabhav, Sarva Dharma Sadbhav, and Sarva Dharma Sahabhav. Because Mama, it is Mama, attachment. While in religion and in philosophy, it seems contradictory to use Sarva Dharma Mama Bhava. So I think I should go back to where he concluded, and he said it's better to be a human being. And this is what the Vedic religion or the Indic religion or the Sanatan tradition begins with. It proclaims Manur Bhava, become a human being. Manur Bhava. Nowhere it is said become a Hindu, become a this or that. Manur Bhava. What is who's a Manu? Manu is he who thinks before doing anything. Thinks and then does. Manute iti manu. Manur bhava. Janaya daivyam janam. And not only stop at being a human being, good human being, but procreate divine progeny. You become human and you produce even better human beings who are endowed with divine attributes. So Manur Bhava, this is the core of the message of Indic religious tradition, and this is the idea of Dharma, which is not bound in any boundaries and walls, which can apply to any person of any caste, any creed, any faith. Manur Bhava, be a good human being and produce divine offsprings. Make your children better than what you are. That's it. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Shri Prabhaji. I think once again we heard a wonderful exposition of Dharma, Dharmic tradition, and Manubhav. I don't see any contradictions really on the left or the right. The concept of Dharma, and what a wide concept this is. Once we, I think, start absorbing the concept of Dharma, automatically a lot of clarity will come in. But the question is, we still don't know what Dharma, and we think Dharma is what the 1871 census asked us to declare. So, but this is a good progress. I think what we are discussing is a wonderful progress. It's very new ideas to most of us. So I'll open this for a few questions, and anybody would like to kindly make it very brief, because we'd like to hear Professor Sharma and Shashi Prabhaji, their views. So you restrict yourself to brief comments and questions. Yes, please. And introduce yourself also.
I'm Professor Dr. Rakhi Mehra. I'm a student of